Hello, hello, hello. Grab your book. It's time for chapter 6. Chapter 6. It's funny how you make your mind up to a certain thing, then turn around and change it. For some reason, I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see that skinny little pup looking at me with his big, sad brown eyes. And when I pulled the pillow around my head and tried to sleep, I could hear that weak, whimpering whine of his, begging for help. So, a little past midnight, I snuck out of bed and went downstairs. It was dark in the kitchen, but with the light, with the yard light on outside, I could see my way to the ice box. There, I got a big bowl of milk and bacon, cheese, and bologna scraps left over from the day's meals. Then I stumbled around on the back porch until I found the flashlight Dad kept on the cabinet next to the deep freeze. A deep freeze is like a really big freezer that you can keep outside and you can put lots of stuff in it. The walk up to the barn was kind of spooky. Late at night, I could imagine all sorts of things lurking outside the shadowed light of my yard lamp, coyotes and bobcats, even a mountain lion, but I wasn't scared with the flashlight in my hand. If I heard any sound, all I had to do was shine the light to see what it was. The pup was in a grain bin where the pup was in the grain bin where I'd last seen him. He whimpered a bit when I walked up and shined the light on him. I stood there a while just to make sure he wasn't going to jump up and bark at me. Then I knelt down and scooted the bowl of milk up close to his head. "Listen, dog," I said. "I still don't have any use for you. I hate dogs, understand? It's only, well, I don't want to watch a dog starve to death." He whined and tried to raise his head. All he could do was kind of cock one ear. I scooted the bowl up so close that it bumped him. But he was still so weak he couldn't raise up to get it. "I don't like doing this," I said, and I felt shivers run down my arm. "But I guess it's the only way to get you to eat." My arm was shaking something terrible. I managed to slide a hand under his head. Oh, he's touching him. And just knowing he was going to reach around and bite me, I was ready to take out running if he made the slightest move. His head felt wobbly in my hand. I raised it up and turned him so his mouth touched the milk. The minute I turned him, that long, floppy tongue of his snapped out of his mouth, and he went to work. I couldn't help smiling. The way he sucked up the milk faster than you could sneeze. Then I shoved the meat scraps over. The pup didn't exactly eat the meat. It was more like he was breathing it in. He chomped down on a double mouthful of bacon and swallowed it without even chewing. It took about 10 seconds for him to polish off all the food I brought, and he was still hungry. All in all, I made 4 trips to the house for food. That pup ate and ate, gobbled up that food till I just knew his little round tummy was going to pop open at the seams. He was still whining for more when I left, but I was afraid to give him any more for fear he might blow up. As I was fixing to leave, I reached to get the bowl. My hand grazed his nose, and that long pink tongue came flopping out. All wet and sticky, he licked at the back of my hand and whined as if to say thanks. I glared down at him, tried to sound mean. "Listen, you mangy dog, you don't have anything to thank me for. Soon as you got enough food to get your strength back, I'm gonna run you off. Understand? I don't like you, and I don't want you around. Soon as you're well, that's it. Got me?" Do you guys think that he's gonna run him off? We can stop here and make a prediction and think, is he gonna run off the dog? Or is he maybe gonna change his mind about how he feels about dogs? We'll have to wait and find out. His little tail gave a weak wag. I scowled at him. "I mean it." I did too, only I guess he didn't believe me. The way I had things figured, as scraggly and sickly as he looked, it'd probably take 2 or 3 days for him to get on his feet again. Then I'd get to stick Then I'd get a stick or something. Then I'd get a stick or some chunkin rocks and run his tail clean off. Miss Stevens is not doing a very good job today. We're going to start over. Then I'd get a stick or some chunkin rocks and run his tail clean off our place. Like I said, my mind was made up. There wasn't anything that could change it. 3 days later, the pup was up on his feet. He looked awfully wobbly, though, and I figured if I ran him off, he couldn't get very far. So I kept feeding him 3 times a day, swiping scraps from our table and sticking them in a plastic baggie and I'd stuffed in my pocket. Mama and Dad and Chucky never did catch me. I was real careful about that. Mama did remark once about how I was eating better. I just smiled and told her how good the homemade rolls were. Then, when she turned her head, I stuffed another one into the plastic bag. The pup enjoyed everything I brought him. Never once did he stick up his nose at any of the scraps. He even liked green beans and corn on the cob. I can still remember the next time I touched him. It really wasn't my idea. Sometimes, when I was bringing him food, he'd get to wiggling, wagging his tail so hard that it shook him clear up to his ears. I was feeding him scraps of bacon one morning when he got to wiggling so much he clean knocked himself over. He landed up against my knee with his fuzzy head against my hand. Of course, I was on my feet and gone in a second, clean up on top of the grain bin, fast as I could scoot. Only the shaking and being afraid didn't take hold of me like I figured. I wasn't trembling all over. I wasn't going through that sick feeling in my stomach that I usually got whenever I was around a dog. This time, it was different. You stay back, I warned as I climbed down from the grain bin. Eat and leave me alone, or I couldn't figure anything mean enough to finish the threat with. Besides, he had already gone back to the bacon. It was 2 days later that I finally got up the courage to touch him on purpose. It took a lot of doing. My hand was shaking something terrible when I touched his fuzzy back. I yanked it away real quick, only this time I didn't run. I didn't climb up to the safety of the grain bin either. Instead, I touched him again. For about a week, I felt big and brave as anything. I figured just by touching him, I was all over the fear and panic that had hung onto me for so long. The real test was yet to come. Mama's meatloaf was about the most favorite thing that pup could sink his teeth into. Even before I dumped it out of the plastic sack into his feed bowl, he knew it was coming. He started bouncing around and yapping. This time, I got tickled at the way he was acting and got to giggling. That only made him wag and yap more. Oh, made him wiggle and yap more. I sat down beside the bowl and started to dump the meatloaf. All of a sudden, he bounced around a couple of times and landed square in my lap. I froze, stiff as a rock, didn't even breathe. Dog's in his lap. He got real still, too. Nothing moved except his eyes, which were on the meatloaf, and his tail, which couldn't stop wagging, even if he wanted it to. Finally, I got up enough courage to give him a good push. He went sliding on his nose across the feed sacks and into the bowl. And before I could so much as blink, he came running back and plopped in my lap again. I started to give him another shove, but for some reason, I reached into the plastic sack and got out a piece of meatloaf. Be my luck for him to chew my hand off when I offered the meat to him. I closed my eyes. He took it from me so light I didn't even feel his long floppy tongue. The next day, I fed him by hand again, and the next, and the next. During those days, I never once told myself that I was going to keep him. I never said, I got me a dog now, and he'll help me so I won't be scared anymore. I never said or thought any of that stuff. Each day, as I walked up the hill to the barn, I told myself that he was probably strong enough that I could run him off. I'd get a pitchfork or a leather strap or some rocks, and I'd run him off once and for all. Then I'd get to the barn, and he'd be all wiggly and excited over what I brought him. And he'd lick my hand and try to crawl up in my lap. And I'd end up shoving and playing with him, giggling and laughing all the while. Then I'd leave the barn and tell myself that tomorrow I'd run him off. Only tomorrow was the same thing. And so was the tomorrow after that. I never planned to keep him, that's for sure. It was just one of those things that happened. I still don't recollect how. It looks like the pup has a home. I'm so excited, and I cannot wait to find out what happens next. So, bum, bum, bum. We'll catch you on Monday with the next chapter. Bye, guys. Have a great weekend.